This is WFO Radio.
Hey, everybody. How's everybody doing out there? WFO, Joe Costello here in the WFO studios, and we are getting ready for another week. And I know everybody is out there in quarantine, and we're doing our best to have a little fun. And so on this episode of WFO Radio, it is early in the week. For those of you who are podcast listeners, you guys know that WFO means Alan Reinhart. Alan Reinhart been coming on the show since 2006 when we were on XM satellite radio. And we had this, great question and answer, NHRA Tuesday, nationwide NHRA discussion, and it was great stuff. We have continued that on the WFO radio podcast. So you're going to hear Alan Reinhart on the show not long from now, just seconds from now. In fact, I do want to mention, though, that this show, now available on Facebook Live, WFO Live, and, of course, YouTube, our WFO Radio YouTube channel, is a weekly podcast, and we have audio only. We have a lot going on. So click like, click subscribe, click share, all those things. And we are going to ask you guys for your questions for Alan Reinhart, because that was one of his original segments. And before we go any further, let's bring him onto the show. The voice of the NHRA, Mr. Alan Reinhart, joining us from Tucson, Arizona. Alan, are you out there?
Yeah, Joe, good to hear from you.
Yes. And so how are you here in, quarantine day 37, if it's even that? I don't know.
Well, today is National Beer Day, so that's a big deal for me. And I'm doing okay. I'm, self-quarantining basically between my house and my shop. But when, I'm at the shop, I'm the only one there. So I'm still, fairly locked down. But just like everybody else, just laying low and hoping we can get this thing behind us sooner rather than later. So like millions of other Americans, I just want to get back to work.
Exactly. I just want to go back to work. I always want to go back to work. Obviously, we have a situation where we like our job, right? We like what we do. But this is even more challenging because we are, unable to do what we like to do. That having been said, not complaining, though, because as I watch the news and I see all those stories of the people who are going in the healthcare industry, wow, true and genuine heroes. I wore a mask today to the grocery store. Again, gloves, mask, the whole deal. And sitting inside that thing for, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, it's a challenge. And I couldn't help but think about those folks performing, life-saving situations, giving care, and unable to think about how itchy and uncomfortable the mask is.
Well, they're definitely having to go through a lot right now to take care of the people that need it. And, there was another member of the NHRA community that had to kind of go through a pretty bad bout with it. So, every time I hear one of those stories, I want to strangle one of those people that said, well, it's just the flu. What's the big deal? And it really just kind of reminds me even more of part of it. So, being self-quarantined is kind of a pain, but I think that being, 6 days or 10 days in the hospital or 14 days just not being able to get out of bed would be even worse. So I'll deal with this.
Absolutely. And we've got Alan via Skype. And of course, all of this is internet based. And so if the internet does, skip or drop out while Alan is on, you may hear that via Skype. Alan, you may or may not know. But we've already got some people out there building up. We got Bob Gardner out there watching. We got Justin in New York. We got Tyrone Oliver. We got Darryl Williams. The great sports radio Vlad is out there. Now, Alan, I told you before the show, but I will tell you right now, we've been experimenting with a little live on Facebook and YouTube like everybody else on the planet has. And so we have decided we're going to have a conversation. Might as well open it up to the folks on Facebook. Maybe they got a question for Alan Reinhart and they could submit it through the comment section.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Now they could get you live, Alan.
I'm sorry, Joe, you faded there for a second. I will tell you, I caught your Friday happy hour last week with Jason and Courtney, and I thought that was definitely an hour well spent. It's kind of interesting to listen to the three of you guys kind of kicking things around. So if that's what this turns into, I'm all for it.
Let's face it. Courtney Enders made the show. She was great. Jason as well. I thought about that program, and everybody can watch it out there on Facebook and on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, of course. But I thought, man, this is a morning show here. Jason Logan, the funny guy, Courtney, the girl with something to say, and then there's me, the neutral character in the middle. Like how many morning shows are based on that combination, period, except with a drag racing theme? I had such a great time. We had cocktails. It was a lot of fun. And, Jason is doing all kinds of great stuff with Joey Fatone. He's out there now. Ask him if he can give me a shout out. He just did, says Jason Logan.
I caught that the other day and watched it, and I thought it was a very entertaining hour and very interesting concept, being able to actually see who you're talking to. So I don't know if anybody wants to look at me, but maybe at some point in the future we can try that.
Oh, they're seeing you right now. It's a great still photograph from a couple of years ago in your NHRA gear, but and you can definitely go back and check. But we need, what we don't have? I don't have a great Alan Reinhart headshot. So we got to work on that. But yeah, I think as the case with everybody out there right now, they're all like picking a corner of their house that can be the studio corner so that they can do whatever it is: Instagram Live, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, or just talk to their friends on FaceTime. They've got a cool background. So we'll, you'll tune that up, or the shop, maybe the shop. What about that?
Yeah, I think the shop would be better. If you don't see me in my natural environment, I'll be sitting in front of my chill chamber or in front of the slot machine or something like that. But we can maybe next week we'll try it from the shop and see how it works out.
Chill chamber. That sounds pretty interesting. All right. Got a couple of questions, and that's the whole bit here. But I do want to get your opinion on a couple of things that happened, the breaking news or the news of the week. Obviously, NHRA and the Lucas Oil Series schedule is out. I think everybody can go, the revised, can go to NHRA.com and find that out. I want to talk about Bunny Burkett, because Bunny was a racer that, of course, there was Shirley Muldowney, was the pro racer that I came to watch and enjoy. But Bunny Burkett, alcohol funny car racer, lady racer. And to me, that totally embraced it, drove home the point. We lost Bunny a few days ago, 74 years old, natural causes. But talk about someone who has affected the lives and careers of so many people that we know now. Gary Pritchett is one, and others. So a couple of words about Bunny.
Well, she was really more of an East Coaster than a West Coaster. So kind of in her heyday, I never actually saw her race until much later in her career when I started traveling a little bit with the NHRA. I'd see stories about her in the magazines and that kind of thing. But, she wasn't somebody that I really had a lot of interaction with until I started traveling with the NHRA. And the first time I actually met her was at Maple Grove a number of years ago. And I walked in just to introduce myself. And before I could get, "Hi, I'm Alan," out, she's, "Alan, great to meet you." And treated me like she'd known me for years. And that was kind of her reputation was, she made everybody feel like the one special person. And that was a tremendous reason for her popularity. Why, even though she never had a ton of on-track success, she did win a division championship in the NHRA, and she won the IHRA World one year. But from her match racing and just the way she treated, the way she interacted with everybody, whether it was media, whether it was a sponsor, or whether it was just somebody standing at the ropes, that reputation was that she made everybody feel special. And, as I said, the first time I met her, she made me feel like the most special person that was there. And that was something I think she did.
I agree. I think that she did win a national at the Grove, and she finished fourth in the world points one year, but it's a fourth behind Ace Manzo, Pat Austin, and Brad Anderson. So there's that.
Yeah, but like I said, she never, at least on the NHRA side of the fence, never had a tremendous amount of success, but that wasn't where she was focused. She was known for, not just going to the major events, the national events, the big tracks, but just to get out there and to meet fans and to promote drag racing as a whole. And, just what she did was tremendous. The fact that she didn't necessarily do it on the national stage, but she would go anywhere, meet anybody, do any match race. And as I said, her legacy, I think, is just that everybody who met her, she made them feel extra special. And that's something that she just had an amazing gift for.
All right. Tremendous. Craig Garland is out there, says, great to hear your voice. And Daryl is out there. Monica is out there. We got a lot of people. Like I said, Bob Gardner is out there. So a lot of people with questions for Alan. Here's the first one, Alan, and we'll just kind of go back and forth from you folks out there who are watching on YouTube. And we ask you to click subscribe, or if you're on Facebook, share the show. And we're going to do a couple of questions for Alan Reinhart. Like Bobby Graham dives in with a question. I've seen plates underneath the front of, I believe, Pro Mod cars and probably other classes. These plates are mounted ahead of the front tires. Are these for keeping the car stable at speed, or what other purpose are they for? I don't know exactly what he's talking about, Alan. I got to guess, though. What do you think?
I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about either. If he's talking about plates in front of the front tires,
I think maybe he's talking about like a wind light taker. I think that might be it, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, that would be something that sticks out from the nose of the body, not necessarily just in front of the tires. And if that's what you're referring to, every class has a rule for how much overhang you can have in front of the front tires. And the tire doesn't stop the clock at the finish line. The body of the car actually does. So if your car, and the rule is 40 inches, just to pick numbers out of the sky here, then they will put that flat piece of metal sticking off the nose of the car out to the maximum 40 inches, because otherwise you could literally lose a race by 6 or 8 inches that you potentially could have won just because the other car has a longer nose. It's perfectly legal. There are a lot of cars, if you look in the stock and super stock ranks, because those cars sit very high in the front end, where they will have a stripe checker hanging down underneath the nose of the car, because in a car like that, the tires are what actually stops the clock. And so they will hang a flat piece of metal down under the nose of the car so that it is the nose of the car that gets the light and not the front tire that gets the light. There's a lot of actually magical science to that. There's a number of racers back in the day that loved the old classic Generation 4 Pontiacs because the nose was so long and they would ride very high. And the guys that were really good at it, I mean, you talk about like the Jeff Hefflers of the world, they could actually go down there, tap the brakes to make the nose of the car come down and grab the stripe with the nose of the car as opposed to the front wheels of the car. And sometimes that 2.5 feet makes a difference when you're dealing with thousandths of a second.
I can imagine. I experimented with that, and we don't know if that's exactly what Bobby is talking about, but we're giving it our best shot. He says, yes, that's it. So there you go. I experimented with a wind light taker in 1995 on my Gen 2 Pontiac Trans Am, and stock front suspension. The front end up considerably when under power, or certainly more so than when on the brakes. And there were a couple of times where I thought I was scrubbing some ET, and I actually ended up breaking out by a considerable amount. I was like, and so I was taking the stripe with the nose. I realized it and I figured it out. So we put something out there, and man, I got protested. This was, mid 90s. I don't know how many people were doing it, but I got protested. I won first night out with it, by the way, which made the protest even more satisfying. But now it's part of the science that is racing. Okay, next one. This one from Derek. When you say things as an announcer, your email disclaimer, for instance, this one coming from Derek Green, he wants to know if you actually say that every time, or if you've got like a button and a recording that you can press so that you do not have to say it over and over again. Various announcements that are disclaimers that you have to repeat.
No, those things, usually it's just a live read, and the email thing is something that, that I came up with, and that I just got tired of getting email questions like, hey, how come beer costs so much, or which is not the realm of what I'm looking for. So that's when I started mentioning disclaimer. But no, I actually say that every time. The only thing that I ever recorded that we used a number of years ago, we used to start pre-race ceremonies with a rundown of all of our official partners and official sponsors. And that was about a 10 or 12 minute thing. And that was the beginning of pre-race every week. And I did record that. We used that for a couple of years. But other than that, if you hear me say it, I'm saying it live.
That's great. And that's the last thing we need is all kinds of pre-recorded stuff. Pre-recorded is bad. Our great friend Melissa Coleman is out there. We've got a vast community of NHRA fans out there and workers and people within the sport that are checking in our WFO Radio live stream. WFO Radio Live is really supportive of our great podcast. Alan, you've been doing this since 2006 on XM Satellite Radio when we first reached out to you. It is now 2020. We are a long way into question and answer sessions like this.
I know, and I'm still hoping to get one right someday.
Okay. I think you've done a great job. Seriously. All right. Another question from Derek. And if you're out there in the comment section, just put your question in the comment section. I believe, as we're still learning to drive this car, there's a little bit of a lag between your comments and when I see them. And so fire off question for Alan about NHRA Mellow Yellow Drag Racing, Lucas Oil Drag Racing, Sportsman Drag Racing, the tech of the cars, whatever. He used to call it Stump the Dummy, which, totally not PC, Alan, but that's okay. This one from Derek. He's curious and interested in categories other than the professionals. And believe it or not, and I don't know why I say it because I love the category as well, in particular, .90 racing and all that goes into 890, 990, and 1090 racing. So he wants you to expound a little bit on that.
Well, those originally came into play, and Super Gas was at first, which is the 990 category, a number of years ago when they were looking for kind of an entry-level something that anybody could get involved with. There are a lot of bracket racers or weekend warriors around the NHRA Tour that there really wasn't a place for on the national event scale. We had stock, we had super stock, we had modified, we had pro stock, we had comp eliminator. But if you're just a weekend bracket racer, there wasn't really a category that you could fit into. And so they came up with the .90 categories, again, Super Gas being first, thinking, okay, heads up, which will be very easy for the fans to understand, with a breakout. And at the time, the classic cars were V8 Vegas and 27 T4s. So I know a lot of those out there. And you would get to the .90 number either with adding weight to the car, or in a number of cases, it was literally a bolt under the pedal. So that when you'd smash the gas, it just wouldn't open the butterflies wide open, and you would adjust that bolt under the pedal to get to the 990. And then over the years, of course, electronics and that started with stutter boxes, which gratefully were outlawed. And then that ended up coming in with delay boxes, where guys decided that a higher speed car would give you a bigger advantage, because coming from behind, you're watching the race fold out in front of you instead of trying to look over your shoulder all the time. And so technology turned it into what it is today. But it really started out being just a basic, bring your local race car out here, slow it down a little bit to whatever your magic number is, and then have at it.
I always tell you, I aspire to run Super Street with our 78 Trans Am. And I want to, but the problem is we always had factory linkage, right? Like the car, a lot of it is still stock. And so when those throttle stops, inline throttle stops, in linkage throttle stops became super popular, we're like, oh man, this is not, we're not going to alter our linkage. But then, under the carburetor stops came back. And so I'm eventually going to go with that. But before that, we used a restrictor plate. We actually had a series of restrictor plates that slowed the car down to in the neighborhood of 1090. And I've got a couple of friends that still use that method in Division 2 just to go run a race every once in a while, because they don't want to invest the amount for the timer and the delay and the throttle stop, call it $1,000 to run one race every other year. So they go have a little fun. They throw a plate under there. They set up a little bit fast and they go racing.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it. The technology is out there now. When you look at, between the weather stations and the ET predicting software and all the other stuff, where you can get it, to the 100th of a second, literally. You look at guys all the time that go, oh, well, I set up to run an 88 and I figured I'd whack the throttle once or two. And, the technology has really taken over to the point where it used to be, kind of a seat of the pants thing as much as anything. And now there's so much technology out there that it makes it much more difficult to do it with the restrictor plate or with the bolt under the carburetor or under the throttle pedal. But there are people that like to do it old school. Ed DeStout has still had a lot of success with doing basically the bolt under the pedal.
Don Cower is out there. And
it may not be the easiest way to do it, but you can do it that way.
Don is out there, says, glad to have you on. And yes, I had a stop under the pedal in super gas and it's cut off. Next question. This one from Kyle. Kyle says, do you think Pro Mod would be possible, would possibly head to Maple Grove at some point, or are the pits too small? So I don't know. The Grove pit area does seem kind of small, but I'm happy to have a Grove period, frankly.
Yeah, I am as well. It's possible that they could end up there at some point. I think, over the years, we've seen them move around from place to place. And I can tell you this, if you're up in that neighborhood, you're a fan and you want to see it, send an NHRA an email, send your racetrack an email and let them know, because, they definitely pay attention to fan feedback. So not saying that it would be an every year thing, but I think it's very possible that they could go up there and think how fast that those things would go in the air up at the Grove. I think that would be blower air, don't you think?
Yes, I think that would be blower air, and it would be great, and I'd be happy to be there and happy to see it. I'm thankful in this situation we're all living with that I got to see all these tracks, period. Thankful for those little things. This one from Daryl. It's kind of about pro stock and expenses. Daryl says he's worried about pro stock. They spend so much money and time on R&D to chase $50,000 compared to other classes. My opinion only, says Daryl. I think that's changed a little bit, Alan. What about you? In terms of purses, that's not in our control or anyone's control, but it's racing for the most part, unless there's a huge television contract paying considerable money. It costs a lot to get to the track, and that's why sponsors are so important. But I think Pro Stock has been doing a pretty good job of lowering the R&D costs. What say you?
Oh, absolutely. The days where you have to spend $2 million on an engine shop to be able to go out and be competitive in Pro Stock, that's just not the case anymore. You can rent or lease race-winning, championship-winning horsepower now from a couple of different places out there. And that is why you've seen such a resurgence in the class over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, because it can now be done on a more affordable basis. Racing is never going to be cheap. Professional racing is certainly never going to be cheap. But the price of admittance in Pro Stock has definitely come down the last few years, thanks to Elite Motorsports, thanks to KB, thanks to McGay, Frank Iaconio, guys that will rent you motor that you can win with.
Exactly. And then it becomes about you and your team. It becomes about, gear selection, who can get the car ready fast enough, more so than the horsepower race that happens in between races. Now, don't get me wrong, that is still very important, just slightly less important. And, you look at guys like Matt Hartford, who finished 5th in the world last year with rented power. Bo Butner a couple of years ago won the championship with rented power. That's pretty amazing. Steve says if someone runs under their index too far, they get hit with either an index adjustment or a horsepower adjustment. Here we go, Alan. I understand the index adjustment, but how does the horsepower adjustment penalize them? Talking automatic horsepower.
The horsepower adjustment penalizes them very simply because in stock and super stock, which is what that relates to, the weight of the car is based on the horsepower, the adjusted horsepower. So let's say your combination is rated at 300 horsepower and you start running fast enough that they realize, we're a little bit out of whack here. Okay, we're going to add 10 horsepower. So now if you're running at a 4 pounds per horsepower category, you just had to make your car 40 pounds heavier. Or it may have potentially moved you into another category. Maybe instead of being a D automatic, now you're a C automatic. But that's how the horsepower works in, because all of the cars in stock and super stock are categorized based on horsepower versus weight. So if your horsepower combination goes up, then your car has to weigh more.
And there you go. So you get hit with horsepower. Now, that is an area of stock and super stock racing that can get a lot of people very angry, Alan. You want to talk a little bit about that? Because I have heard racers get very upset that another racer goes out there and airs it out or does something in a situation where it's not really important and damages everybody. Can you talk about that? Like, I've heard people get upset.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's say that, Joe, what motor's in your Firebird, Joe?
Well, it's a 455 Pontiac. It came with a 400. So let's say I have a 400, or you can make it a 4. Let's say I got a 400 Pontiac under the hood.
Okay, so you got a 400 Pontiac, and let's say that your car is an e-automatic. Now, I have basically the same car, okay? I live in Arizona, you live in Florida, and I have an e-automatic, and my car will run, 75 or 80 under the index. It's fine. I'm not trying to set the record. I'm not going to go to Indy and try to qualify, but it suits me just fine out here, and I can be competitive. And, the occasional heads-up race, I do okay with the local guys. I'm very happy. You go out, you build a new motor, you go with all the tricks, all the stuff, you squeeze everything you can possibly get out of it, and then you go to Gainesville where you're and you run 130 under the index. So now that combination that you run just got more horsepower. Maybe it was rated at 300 horsepower, and now it's going to be rated at 310. That's not just you, that's everybody. So you just made me add 50 or 60 pounds to my car, and all of a sudden my 75 under car is now only 55 under, and I'm not nearly as competitive. I always end up qualifying. I can't pick so you have penalized me when I did nothing wrong. And I'm a little upset about that, to tell you the truth, Joe. You stinking dog. If I was there, I would have protested you. They would have torn you down, found out you were illegal, and you'd have been suspended for 10 years. But that's where that comes into play, where a racer in one part of the country can change the combination for everybody that runs that same thing. And there have definitely been some guys that get upset about that. And it literally could make the difference between whether or not I could qualify. It certainly makes a difference when I've got a heads up race. Maybe there's one other guy out here that's got a D automatic, and we're pretty close. So if we have to run heads up, all right. But now you just made me add 50 pounds to my car, and I'll never be able to outrun him heads up again. So that's why I'm annoyed with you. You're pissing me off, Joe. I got to tell you.
No, I understand it, Alan. And I have been around certain circumstances where, and I don't remember who it was or the situation, but someone who races on a very regular basis and has got a pretty fast car, and someone who races on a not really very often basis and has a pretty fast car. The guy who's just coming out for once or twice a year hurt everybody who is there on a regular basis. And they were mad. They were very mad. And I was like, I tried to understand their anger, and I think now everybody does. That's something, though, that, you'd have to have like a reporter on the scene, right, to capture that kind of anger. All right, next one from Jeremy. Jeremy says, Alan, what do you think about the poker chips in the bag for eliminations thing? And I can tell you that I did this with the World Door Slammer Nationals down there in Orlando. We had all the racers on the starting line. They dug into a bag, and it was like there were 2 number 1s and 2 number 2s, and then whoever pulled out the number 1s, they had to race. I would have done it a little differently and given the higher qualified car lane choice. In this circumstance, they assigned lane choice, but it was very dramatic. What do you think, Alan?
I'm okay with that if it's an exhibition race. I wouldn't want to see that come into play in a points race or a championship, simply because at that point, what good is qualifying? If you got 16 cars on a property, well, don't even bother qualifying. Just, everybody grab a chip and let's go race. I think qualifying needs to mean something when you are racing for points or for a championship. In an exhibition race, I'd love to see it in the Mickey Thompson Pro Bike Battle, for instance, where we did it a little bit differently last year, where guys come out and did the blind draw, and you didn't know who was going to have to race whom. I think that's fun in an exhibition. I would not want to see it used in a championship or a point scenario.
And the chip draw might be a little less dangerous for you.
Oh, come on. I fell off the stage. Big deal. I bounced right back up.
You did. In fact, that Dasani water bottle that you had in your rear pocket, I'm showing everybody, he had one of these, and it acted like a spring, and he landed on it and he popped right back up. It was one of the great athletic moments of Alan Reinhart's life. All right. Next one, Keith Neiman, who is he's posting all kinds of great photos on his social media about he's taken apart his pit vehicle and gone from the ground up. He just wants you to say attention in the pits, and then lower your voice and say attention in the pits. Top Dragster, this is your first call to the lane for Q1. He needs his fix. He wants to feel it. You understand what he wants?
Listen up in the pits. Attention in the pits. Top Dragster, I need you to the staging lane for round number 1.
And there you go. Isn't this fun? John O'Neill, what's he say? He says, do you think the season will be with the season suspended? Do you think that is going to hurt the teams with sponsorship or even the company sponsoring events? Well, the team isn't suspended. I mean, I don't know, postponed. We're losing a couple of races, but I just want to qualify that their season is planned. We are planning on having a season. Go ahead, Alan. What do you think? Do we still have them?
I lost you there for just a moment. The last thing I heard was the season has been postponed.
Right. Instead of suspended, the word suspended and postponed, I don't know. I just want to make sure people understand that we are having a season, but he thinks, he's wondering, do you think it'll hurt the teams with sponsorship or the companies sponsoring events? And I think that answer is kind of obvious in that it's hurting everybody. But since it's hurting everybody, things are all pretty much
My guess would be, and I'm sorry, you were kind of coming and going. My guess would be that there will be some adjustment made either right now or going forward. I mean, if I'm a sponsor and I bought my billboard thinking that it was going to be at 24 races this year and it's only going to be at 19, then I think there's either got to be some kind of adjustment, or if I'm a sponsored team out there right now, I'm doing everything I can to get my on social media, whether I'm, you can't really go do a display or a car show because none of that's happening. But I'm trying to find some way to generate some interest for my sponsor, even though the car's not on the racetrack. And I'm sure that's what all the teams are doing.
Absolutely. And everybody is doing, like every celebrity is doing something using some sort of situation like this. And I just want to give a shout out. We hear Alan, he's coming in and out a little bit. I am taxing my internet connection to the max, and it's amazing. It's holding up. And I'm not the only one. Like our whole internet, knock on wood, the whole internet of the United States of America, man. It's amazing. It's handling all of this. All right. Lucas Stefanik says some top dragsters from 2 to 3 seasons ago had snorkels on the front of them. Now they don't. What happened to them? Asks Lucas. Snorkels.
I'm not sure what he's talking about.
Yeah, I don't know either. Snorkels. Yeah, I don't know.
I guess potentially if you're talking about an alcohol burner, the fuel cars, and some of them still do have the little snorkel up between the front wheels, basically, which is a fuel tank vent. That could be, if you're talking about an alcohol car, that could potentially be a fuel tank vent. If you're talking about a gas burning car, they don't drain the tanks nearly as fast because they don't have as much volume. So you wouldn't need one of those. And I think more and more of the cars now are going to, some kind of a gas combination, whether it's a turbocharger or a vortex style supercharger, procharger. So that may be it. I think more of the cars are burning gas right now than alcohol. So maybe they just don't need that fuel tank vent. That's just a guess.
Interesting. And I don't know exactly what he's asking, but I'm just going to blame the centrifugal supercharger. Just because that's been such a change, maybe. But Kyle says he thinks there's a small vent to keep electronics cool. And now Lucas says it's top fuel dragsters instead of top dragsters. I think I maybe read that wrong, which is very possible. Top fuel dragsters, and he has now said it. So it's definitely the snorkel for the fuel tank, Alan.
Yeah, that's what the snorkel is that you used to see up in front of the tires. Now, some of the cars, particularly the Schumacher cars, and I think Morgan Lucas's fab shop is doing the same thing. They have the vent now down under the front wing. So that's why you don't see the snorkel up on top anymore, just because they have moved the vent down to under the wing. But because those cars are drawing fuel out of the tank at such an enormous rate, you've got to have a big physical vent so you don't end up with a suction in the tank and have the pump end up drawing air. But that's what it is. And they've moved the vent down to under the front wing on some of the cars.
All right, here's another question. Back during the whole deep stage debate, you had a column in National Dragster. And that column, speaking of which, by the way, National Dragster, they're putting up editions of the Dragster for free for everyone to read during this crisis. And so if you haven't, so many people haven't read the National Dragster in a long time. They haven't really seen the fundamental transformation that has occurred with the Dragster. It's been really great. Alan's got a column. Brian's got a column. I've got a column. They're all different, all talking about different stuff. Great stuff. You should go find him. But he's referencing the column you had last year or the year before regarding deep staging. And the column stated that in some classes, if you deep stage, you will be disqualified, which got him to wondering which classes and why is that? So which classes are you disqualified for deep staging?
Stock, super stock, all the .90 categories, you'll be disqualified for deep staging. Top dragster and top sportsman as well. But you can deep stage in the pro classes and in the alcohol classes, but not in the rest of them.
Why is that for the layman out there?
I'm not 100% sure why they decided to make that a disqualification. There was a time when a number of racers did deep stage, especially the heavier or the slower stock eliminator cars, because they simply just don't move that fast. And you'll remember back in the day when some of the guys had the itty bitty front tires on the thing. I mean, not like the airplane style the dragsters were running, but they would run a very small diameter front tire because you had to do that for reaction time. At the time then, you'd always see, deep written on the side of the car. So the starter would know, hold up a minute, make sure they go in. And I believe what it came from was it turned out to be a bit of a headache that, somebody didn't get an opportunity to felt like they were being hung out while the other guy was given extra time to deep stage. So in order to just get rid of the entire thing, they just outlawed it. I don't know that for a fact, but I could make a logical explanation for that. So, if nobody's allowed to do it, then, you don't have to necessarily wait on the other guy with the auto start coming in. And as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, that's about the same time that this happened was when an auto start came in. And so maybe that had something to do with it. That the auto start didn't know it had to wait for a deep stager. So they just said, look, guys, no more.
It's one of those things, or all of those things at the same time. It's just this added element of time. And I think they decided to take it off the table because if you got 20% deep staging out there, it's going to slow everything down. It's going to cause all kinds of problems. You're going to get a lot more red lights. I agree. All right. This one from Keith again, who is out there watching on Facebook. Thank you, Keith. Please share. Get a watch party going, folks. Last night, I tweeted about missing the sound of Steve Evans, as we all do. We all grew up with Steve Evans. Alan got to actually interact with him personally, which is awesome. It got me talking by Facebook with a D4 buddy of mine and how much we like Bob Unkefer, who is out there probably at some point. He wants to know, though, who was the announcer that did lots of D5 stuff with Bob? He's since passed away. He's talking about Leo, Alan. I can hear his voice in my head, but can't think of his name. He died of cancer at any rate.
Talking about D5.
Yes.
Probably talking about Bruce Kamada.
Oh, perhaps Bruce. Maybe he's talking about Leo. Someone said Leo. Maybe he's talking about Bruce. He died of cancer at any rate. Another great announcer. I miss hearing him on the PA. What are your thoughts?
Well, Leo was a Division III announcer for years and years and years. He was out of Youngstown, Ohio, and started doing Division III stuff, I think like in the 70s. He was an icon. Did some national event work, but really was more known for his divisional work, which he did for about 30 years. And he was incredible. There was also Lynn Nickerson, who was down in Division IV. He was out of Texas. We lost him a couple of years ago. And Bruce Kamada, who did a lot of the Division V stuff. Vandermeer was his home racetrack. But one of the things that all three of those guys had in common is that because they concentrated so heavily on the division schedule, they knew everybody. And it was, God help you if you're the one that had to go in and fill in for Leo at a Division III race, or for Lynn Nickerson, a Division IV race, because Lynn knew what his wife's name is, knew that his kid was going to college at Texas A&M, knew, that his dog just had surgery last week, and he was such an insider in his division that that's what part of what made them so popular was everybody felt like that's my announcer. That guy knows me, knows my family, knows what we're doing. And, there are a number of guys out there that have gotten that reputation or that status over the years in their division simply because they concentrate on a little bit smaller geographic area than guys like you and I do. Steve Wong, same way up in Division 6. So I'm not sure which one of those guys that he's referring to, but there have been some tremendous announcers, and Bob Unkefer certainly is on that list.
He has confirmed it was Bruce.
Okay.
Yeah. So there you go. And that is the secret, right? Like just knowing the people that you're talking about as well as you possibly can. And that will give you all kinds of great commentary. Let's see. What are your thoughts? John Usherman wants to know what your thoughts are on A-Fuel funny cars. So No supercharger on a funny car, I guess, in the alcohol ranks. That's a question that's been bantered about a lot. Like, if we've got them in dragster, why don't we have them in funny car?
A fan of the A-fuel funny cars. I think that having them in the dragster ranks makes the dragsters unique, and the fact that in funny cars everybody has the blown alcohol combination kind of makes that funny car category unique. The reason for it is pretty simple. Back in the early days of racing, there was junior fuel, which was injected, and then there was top fuel, which was blown. And junior fuel was a separate class. It was kind of a stepping stone up to top fuel. Over the years, junior fuel turned into A fuel, which kind of got morphed into the alcohol dragster ranks, 25 or 30 years ago. And then, was part of Pro Comp first and ended up where it is now. But there was never really a separate class. There was never junior funny car. There were a number of the early funny cars that were injected, no question. But as the class morphed and developed, everybody just added blowers. And there was never a separate class. You never had funny car versus junior funny car. And the class simply was never developed. As funny cars came to be, they started putting injectors on them. They started putting nitro in them. And then when somebody put a blower on, everybody put a blower on. There was never, as I said, never really a separate class, and the separate class was simply never created.
Got it. That's a very good question and very interesting. Me personally, first of all, I like A fuel. A fuel is great. I get why it's there. I get what it is, but I really am impressed by the swap feet nature of blown alcohol funny cars and blown alcohol dragsters. It's just so different with the RPM so high up. It's a very different feeling, a different sound. And I don't want to see that go away. And so I think we've got enough A fuel dragsters out there. They've dominated the category for the most part. There's a lot, with exception of Joey Severance and a few guys, Sean Cowie. I want to see blowers stay on funny cars. Kyle wants to know, will there still be prime time for the last Saturday qualifying session on 2-day races? I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if you know the answer to this.
I don't know the answer either. I would think no. I would think that prime time will still take place on Friday night, which was, kind of where it was always planned at the races where we do have Friday pro qualifying. But at the races where we just have Saturday only qualifying, I would think prime time goes away, but I'm not the one that makes that decision.
Right. I don't know. The answer is we don't know. And we will find out. And that's one of the reasons you got to stay tuned and go to NHRA.com. And once we get closer to the Gator Nationals, June 5th through 7th, and the full updated schedule is available on NHRA.com and the internet, you can find out. And that is a good question. You could probably send them an email like, hey, I am deciding whether or not to go to a race based on this. Which one should I go to? Let's see. Deep and Hawk says hello. John says thank you for answering. We're getting good feedback out there, Alan. I like focusing on, the stock and super stock cars like we did a couple of weeks ago in the podcast, where one of our listeners was wondering how he can make his street car into a stock eliminator car, and we basically crushed his dreams. That was very well listened to, and I think I got a lot of good feedback on that. Because people, I don't know that they realized when those stock eliminator cars, 9-inch wide tires, flat hoods come rolling around the corner, exactly how much goes into it. And you cleared it up when you said it's pro stock, just with whatever they got, like to the max.
Yeah, and that's what stock eliminator has come through over the years. When you look at, how fast they're going, and I'm not talking about, the new generation cars, I'm talking about the older ones. How fast the classic muscle cars are going in stock eliminator right now. And that is all a matter of refinement for the 30 or 40 years that people have been kind of rubbing on these things. And, the 2 extra horsepower here or 3 extra horsepower there may not sound like a lot, but if it's 2 or 3 a year times 40 years, all of a sudden that's pretty stout. And, the cars simply didn't make that much power when they rolled off the assembly line. That's why you started with, the old, it's been blueprinted. You remember that?
Yes.
It's been the technology is out there now with the newer engines that blueprinting is not such a big deal because they're so good coming out of the factory. But 70s used to be such that if you took a stock motor, if you took one out of a junkyard and you wanted to go have it blueprinted, because simply put, the cylinders were not round. The cylinders were not square 90 degrees to the crankshaft. and there was a lot of power to be freed up just making all of those things perfect. And so that's, where that term came from. Nowadays, if you're going to buy an aftermarket block, let me tell you, if you call Dart and say, send me a block, it is blueprinted. If you've been around as long as I have, next time you're in a situation where a guy's just got 40 blocks all sitting someplace, walk over and just look at them, and you'll be amazed. You can look and see that, the camshaft's not exactly centered, or wait a minute, those cylinders, there's something, and they're far enough off that you can see them, but that used to be within manufacturing tolerance. And so that's where the whole blueprinting thing came in. And that's where it all started, where guys started figuring out, we can take this stock motor and find more power and find more power. And then over the years, it's just gotten to where it is now. Wow,
that's interesting. In terms of the blueprinting, I wasn't even fully understanding early on, and I had to ask my father, what does that mean? Don't they just, from the factory? It's no, in a factory, especially back then, makes something, there's the factory tolerance, and then there's the racing tolerance, and then they are different. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, very, very different. And, the things, and even the new generation stuff, we had the conversation however many weeks ago when Frank Iaconio sent a block down to the Grays and had it honed, and all of a sudden picked up, 40 horsepower. Amazing, just and we're talking at a professional level now. Now, there are obviously guys that build stock eliminator motors that your average guy at the machine shop on the corner doesn't necessarily know, just because if you focus on one thing and that's all you do, and that's where you put all your effort into it, you're going to learn things, find out things that you don't. I've been around engines as long as I can remember. I've rebuilt more than my fair share. When I was in the construction business, we would do the engines for our trucks and all that stuff. And I did, send out and have the machine work done. And then I did all of the assembly, all the stuff. I like to think I was pretty work with David Nickens in a pro stock shop and start seeing things and look at it. And it's what? We changed push rods and it made an 8 horsepower difference? Are you kidding me? But there are all these little things that have been found over the years by the professional engine builders that are just looking for these 2 or 3 more horsepower. And that's where stock eliminator has come through these days, and super stock as well.
Unkefer is out there. He says to Keith Neiman that it was Bruce Kamada, and they did the Bruce and Bob show together behind the Mike D5 events in the 90s. So we got Unk out there watching. What's up, Unkefer? How you doing, bud? Stay safe out there.
One of the things that Bruce did that was a classic, there was the Bruce Kamada School of Drag Racing. And if you were a Bandamere guy, and it was kind of a lark thing, but if you had the Bruce Kamada School of Drag Racing sticker on the back of your car and you won, you got paid cash. I think it was $5, but he would come find you in the winner's circle and present you. And, Bruce's things that he did in his division for his guys. And, like I said, there's just a lot of that stuff out there. The guys that focus on a smaller geographic area and get to know all of the players and all of the folks intimately. If you've been going out doing your attention in the pit stuff on a national level. Okay, well, that's great. You run into, 2 or 3 races, an event. Okay, how long is it going to be before you've met everybody in Division 2?
Amazing. Right.
But if Division 2 was your deal and you got 2 or 3 people every week, you know what? After a couple of years, you're going to know most of those guys, and it's just, that's why the guys that do the geographic stuff like that are so good, because they have all that intimate knowledge of the racers. They see them every week.
Perfect example of the attention in the pits show. And for me, it's great. Because that connection you make it's priceless, because now you know them and they know you and their family, and you could say hey man, when you got something interesting, let me know, get me on Facebook. And that has been a real blessing to be able to go out there and meet face to face all these people. And absolutely. Okay. Justin wants to know, and we're winding down, folks. So if you've got a question for Alan, we just can't keep him on here all day. He's got all kinds of very important things he's got to do. I don't know what they would be, but he's got important stuff. Justin wants to know if NHRA has radio commentary or just track announcing. And I like to think it's the same thing. Thanks to NHRA.tv. What about you?
No separate radio commentary. There is a broadcast at every one of the racetracks, either an AM or an FM. So that the racers back in the pits, if they're far enough away that they can't hear the PA, they can tune in, at least hear their class calls or pay attention to what's going on. But there's not a separate radio broadcast. For a number of years, we did the audio broadcast, and now, of course, we've got NHRA TV.
I pitched it to XM Satellite Radio, though, Alan. I went into the boardroom. I had a reveal. I had everybody fired up and ready to go about it. And it was right before that big merger. And I was telling them because they were losing NASCAR radio. They had lost, actually, NASCAR radio to Sirius, but there were still two companies, and they were trying to figure out what to do. And that's where the Power Shift show, where we first met professionally, along with Bob Varsha, who is still ailing, and more terrible news about Bob, incidentally. I don't know if you heard that, but and Mike King were all part of the show. And I went into the board at XM and was like, listen, guys, there is no reason why we can't have an NHRA drag racing channel. These drivers are just as interesting, if not more. The cars are cool and exciting, if not more. And you've got a full day of content instead of just 4 hours. I think it's something that we could devote. And they, they looked at me and they smiled. And they like, oh, yeah. And then the merger happened and I was fired. But other than that, it was great. It was a great idea.
Yeah, sometimes the idea just comes along. It's just the wrong time. Just the wrong time.
Isn't that true? Jeff Foster is out there. He has to make sure the chill chamber is a full 23 degrees. The chill chamber. He knows what you're talking about.
He has one. And yes, it certainly is. Anybody that follows me on Twitter, you've seen pictures of my chill chamber. Yes, it is designed to do one thing, and that is to keep Budweiser at the perfect temperature, and it does.
There you go. Kyle says, thank you for the info, keeping us fans informed when there is no racing and interested, et cetera, and so on. And I think unless something great happens in the next 20 seconds, that will be the end of our Q&A session with Alan. But I think you did pretty well. All right, what do you think of the live component, Alan? A little bit different than sending them in with emails, which is great. People can email me, Joe at WFOradio.com. And of course, send them via Facebook, the Facebook page, Twitter, all of those things. But boy, was this efficient.
No, I like it. I'm all for it. And if somebody wants to email something to me, you can always send it to announcer@NHRA.com. I don't monitor it in real time, but if you've got a question or you want to go in depth on something, you want to get in touch with me, announcer@NHRA.com. I check it at least a couple of times a day just because, at this point in time, we don't have a whole lot more going on.
I don't know. I think people who watch NHRA.TV and go to the national events are left wanting a little bit because you did not qualify it with no shout outs and all that. Can you give us the full disclaimer, please?
Nah, because it's pretty simple. If somebody's going to send me an email that says, hey, I want a shout out, what do they want me to do? Shout it out in my shop?
Yeah, exactly.
So as long as I'm not on the microphone, I'm not. I'm still not the complaint department, but if somebody's got a question or comment that they want to fire to me, and I've been getting a few here and there. So I'm still, like I said, I'm still monitored, still like to keep in touch with the fans. And, if there's news to share, I'd share it. I just wish there was some.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're just waiting. And that's the thing. The waiting is the hardest part. Some very wise man once said that. And we just got to wait. But we're all finding new things to do like this. And the Caruso's got a show and Quarantine with the Caruso's. And there's just so many people doing a lot of watching. Because they've already serviced their equipment, like the teams, Alan. Let me ask you that. The teams, everything is serviced and ready, right? Like what else could they be doing? I don't imagine that they're out there testing and spending money in this difficult time. So once you get everything ready for whenever we go back, what then?
Well, actually, right now, there's not a whole lot going on in Indiana. The Indiana is under, shelter at home lockdown. So the race shops are all sheltered or shuttered. I do believe that, I know Don Schumacher is doing some manufacturing, working with making face shields and doing some other stuff. I don't know if JFR is or not, but a lot of the race employees, a lot of the race team employees right now literally are not going to work because the race shops are simply not open. So, you talk about all the folks that really want to get back to work, and believe me, those guys are at the top of the list.
There you go. Alan, great job as usual. Appreciate what you do. Thank you so much for taking questions from the WFO radio listeners. I got your Twitter handle up on the screen at NHRA Reinhart for those that want to follow you on the Twitter machine and, keep up with what's going on out there in Tucson, Arizona. You got to stay safe. Obviously, I know you are obeying all posted orders, and as am I. It is tough. I went to the store today. There was a lot of people that were, in my opinion, I don't know what they were thinking, but it looked like they had no idea there was a crisis going on at all, period. But stay safe. Thank you so much for entertaining the WFO audience.
Thanks, Joe. You stay healthy as well, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right, there he goes. Alan Reinhart, the voice of the NHRA, and just did a nice question answer session.
Thanks, Joe. You stay healthy as well, and I
look
look
at
forward
that.
to talking to you again soon.
All right, there he goes.
Oh, all of a sudden,
Alan Reinhart,
a
the
little
voice
bit
of
of
the
a,
NHRA,
what would I call that? I would call
just,
that a glitch.
Did a nice question answer
Thanks,
session.
Joe. You stay healthy as well.
Oh, no, we got a
and I
time
look
tunnel
forward to talking
going.
to you again
I
soon.
love the
All
time
right, there
tunnel.
he goes. Oh,
We'll
just
just
see how we figure that out then.
What would I call that?
Man, we
We'll
got a
call
whole
that
catastrophe
glitch.
going
Did
on.
a nice question.
Time tunnel. Let's see how long it
answer
goes,
session.
man. Let's just go with
Oh,
it.
no, we got a time tunnel going. I love the
What
time
am
tunnel.
I doing?
Figured it out. How about that? Yeah, a little time tunnel going on. I got Skype going. I got all this different. All right, let's get back into a couple of final questions. Daryl Williams, the big difference between NASCAR and NHRA and MCA. How about that?
Why is this happening?
Yeah, all right, what we're going to do is end the show.
I got Skype.
That's it. Thank you very much, Alan. Appreciate it.
A couple of final
All you folks out there.
Williams, the big
WFO.
difference between NASCAR and NHRA and MCA.
How about that?
Why is this happening?
Yeah, all right, what we're going to do is end the show.
Skype.
That's it. Thank you very much, Alan. Appreciate it.
A couple of final
All you folks out there.
Williams, the big
WFO.
difference between NASCAR and NHRA and MCA.